Welcome to episode 8 of the Purkey Horror Picture Show, all about 1963's Day of the Triffids.
And I really got hot when I saw Jeanette Scott fight a Triffid that spits poison and kills.
Day of the Triffids is a British production. It was directed by Steve Seckley. I don't know how to say Steve Seckley. An uncredited director is Freddie Francis. Now, before I get into the story, this is a quick little thing. I had to read a little bit on this because I remembered hearing something about this being a co-direction. So, Freddie Francis is uncredited as a director on this movie. Steve Seckley, they did not like what he was producing, and they ended up saying they only had about an hour worth of usable footage by Steve Seckley. So they brought in Freddie Francis. Now, if I'm correct, Freddie Francis at this point was kind of a workman-like director, and he did a lot of B movies and genre movies. He did a lot of work for like Hammer, and for those of you know Hammer, it was like the recreation of all the Dracula and Frankenstein movies and stuff with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. And Freddie Francis did some of the best ones of those. One of my favorites being Dracula Has Risen from the Grave. And Freddie Francis has a great eye compared to Steve Seckley. And in fact, Freddie Francis, after probably the mid-70s or so, didn't direct so much. Later on, Freddie Francis was a cinematographer for a lot of great movies. So even though you don't know maybe his name, he was the cinematographer like The Elephant Man, Straight Story, Glory, Cape Fear, the one that Scorsese made. So Freddie Francis has been part of a lot of movies you might have seen, but you didn't know it, and he was in part of Day of the Triffids. So before I get into the actors and everything, I'll give you the basic concept of Day of the Triffids, because one of the best things about this movie is the concept. So the concept is characters in London. There's a meteor shower, a big meteor shower. It's a worldwide meteor shower. Everyone's amazed by it. Colorful and everyone crazy. During that meteor shower, you're introduced to a Navy officer whose eyes are bandaged. He is supposed to get the bandages off the next day, so obviously he's had some kind of injury. He's in the hospital. And what happens is, the next morning, the whole world that looked at the meteor shower has gone blind. So he takes off his bandages, he's blurry, he gets to look around for a minute, and then for a bit, he's walking around and people are just stumbling around the streets. There's mayhem everywhere, and he's kind of like last man on earth. Although there are a few people that can see, but not many. Now, meanwhile, so his basic story is the main stuff that was filmed by Steve Seckley. Now, there's an alternate parallel story of a couple in a lighthouse. And this is going to be Jeanette Scott, who you hear in the science fiction double feature song. And you have Clairon Moore, who plays Tom, her husband. And they are both in a lighthouse, and that's why they don't see the meteor showers. They're inside the lighthouse during the meteor shower. They're both scientists, so they both study like marine biology and stuff like that out there while they're minding the lighthouse. So that whole lighthouse sequence is just kind of this separate storyline, probably about 25 minutes worth, that Freddie Francis added in to give it enough time to be a proper movie. That part of the movie is very exposition-y. Like, there's a lot of reasons to they have a lot of ways to let us know what's going on in the story. So you'll have radio reports they're going to be hearing, and they're studying to find out how to solve the problem. But the way that sequence is shot is much more dramatic and much better than Steve Seckley stuff. So you can kind of see the difference between Freddie Francis and Seckley in style. So a couple things to talk about. During the meteor shower, it activated these plants called Triffids. Now, I might be getting this wrong. I guess this is a famous book at the time, so I wasn't really aware of it. And it has been remade a couple times, I think in Britain as TV miniseries and as a movie. Neither of them are considered very good. I have not seen either of them. The idea is these Triffid plants that came from meteors previously have just been normal plants, but the meteor shower activates them, and they grow really big, and they can move, and they can spit out this goo that will poison you. So before I go any further into the story, I'm not going to do the whole plot. One of the more interesting things about this is 1963, so it's a killer plant movie. So immediately you'll think of things like, Little Shop of Horrors, or even more famously before this was Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Now, Invasion of the Body Snatchers was very much one of those, paranoid, communism's going to get you, people aren't who they seem kind of movies, like we talked about a little bit. Some of the alien movies of the 50s would do the same thing. And in fact, Invasion of the Body Snatchers were aliens, basically. So you would think it would be like that, but this is actually really very similar to a modern zombie movie. So I thought about this, and as I was watching, I'm thinking like, wow, this might be the first modern zombie movie. Of course, you always hear about there's a Last Man on Earth movie, and I can't remember the name of it. It might be called Last Man on Earth, and it's got Vincent Price in it, and of course there's Night of the Living Dead. Night of the Living Dead is considered like the first modern zombie movie, but this one has so many elements that if they weren't the giant plants called Triffids, it would basically be a zombie movie. So what are the elements? First of all, the beginning is essentially exactly the same as 28 Days Later or the beginning of The Walking Dead. Guy in a hospital is unconscious when everything crazy happens, wakes up, goes out, what the heck's happened? I'm the last man on Earth, kind of, and there's zombies running around. In this case, instead, there are zombies like, the people themselves are kind of like zombies because they're all blind, so they're all stumbling around the streets. Or in one case, there's a doctor in the hospital, tells them what's going on, and then jumps out a window. Or in the other case, you got the Triffids themselves, and they're dangerous, and they're kind of slow moving, and they're lumbering, and they'll kind of come after you based on sound or other things. So they're kind of like zombies too. If this didn't have such silly looking monsters, because the Triffids are pretty silly looking, which is a lot of fun. If they weren't so silly looking, this would be a much darker, scarier movie because the actual story is pretty dark. So let's get into a few of those things. What are some of the dark scenes in this movie? If you think about what's happening in them, they're very dark. So first of all, like I said, he wakes up, he finds out the whole world's kind of gone blind, and then the sailor guy, talks to a doctor, and then the next minute the doctor jumps out the window. He goes out into the streets. There's a scene where he meets a little girl, and they end up joining up together because she can see. And all these basically he goes to a train station, the train's out of control and slams into a wall, and basically everyone's dying and tumbling out, and they find out this little girl can see, and some crazy old guy grabs her. He's gonna use her as his eyes, and he's just taking her against her will. Pretty dark. Oh, in the middle of that, there's a sequence on an airplane which is amazing, especially once again for this time. If you think about what's happening there, it's not the kind of thing you saw in movies those days. There weren't really apocalyptic movies in this sense. There's a scene on an airplane.
Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your safety belts as we are about to land. I assure you, everything's all right. Thank you.
Fasten your safety belts, please. Fasten your safety belts and no smoking, please. The belt all right?
The pilot, is he blind too?
Blind?
Oh, don't be silly, he's perfectly all right.
Blind?
Where it's running out of gas, and the crew is trying to keep everyone relaxed because basically they're going to run out of fuel and crash into the ground, and you got this whole plane full of people who are blind. Pretty crazy. And then one other thing is they end up going to this chateau, and at this point it's the girl and the sailor guy. They've made it over to France. Go to a chateau, a bunch of blind people there, and a bunch of them had been blind previously, so they can kind of adapt to it a little bit more. At one point the guy leaves to go investigate something, and when he comes back, a whole truckload of prisoners who didn't go blind because they didn't see the meteor shower had shown up at the chateau and taken it over. And once again, dark, well, in this case, they're forcing the women to dance, which of course would not be what happens, but the implications are pretty obvious. And essentially the guy and one woman, who's the main woman from the chateau, and the young girl have to flee as the Triffids encroach upon the chateau, and basically all their friends and the prisoners get killed by the Triffids. It's like, my gosh. A couple great scenes that I'll point out are a lot of fun, mostly because they're silly now, but I'm sure were fun at the time. A couple of my favorites. There's one where early on the sailor guy is walking around. He doesn't know about the Triffids exist yet, and he's walking around through the desolate city, and he walks through a park, and there's a Triffid just standing there, and he doesn't know it, and as he walks by, you see the Triffid's face, and it's like, it's just hilarious. Another scene is in the lighthouse. The couple sees one of I think they hear on the radio that the Triffids exist, so when they see one outside, they're freaked out. They run out to go try to attack it because they don't know if they can kill it or not. And they come back inside, and the Triffid is snuck inside, and there's a great scene where the Triffid and them fight. And you got Triffid arms fighting them the whole time. A lot of fun. So I would say probably 3.5, maybe 3.5 stars. I said I saw this in the 80s when I was a little kid. Well, I wasn't a little kid in the 80s. I was, my late teens and 20s. So I must have even seen it before that and then seen parts of it later than that. All I really had remembered was the lighthouse, and I had remembered the Triffids themselves, kind of how they looked. So my next movie just came in the mail. And it came, so I ordered a used DVD. I know people do order DVDs still. And so somehow it got accidentally almost sent to the Czech Republic, but then it had to go through customs and ended up coming through from Great Britain. I think the original seller was from Great Britain. And then got to us here. And actually it's great timing because it's the next movie I need to do. So I did that about right. And that is Curse of the Demon or Night of the Demon, starring Dana Andrews. Now, I won't go into all the details on it, but there's a reason there's two different names. It's the same movie, kind of. We are going to watch Night of the Demon. So if you are playing along, look for the original Night of the Demon. I believe it's going to come up as either 1957 or 58 because each one was released on a different year, I believe. All right. See you soon.
To the late night double feature picture.